Wildfires are a force of nature, but for those who fight them, they often feel like something much darker. This is the story of Captain James, a seasoned firefighter who faced not just the flames, but the unexplainable horrors they seem to conceal deep in the mountains. Captain James had been leading firefighting teams for over a decade. His latest assignment took him deep into the remote mountains, a place where jagged cliffs and dense pine forests created a natural labyrinth. The wildfire here was unlike any he had faced before. It wasn't just the size or the speed. There was something sinister in the air, an unshakable feeling that the fire itself was alive. "We were setting a fire break," James recalled. The crew had been working tirelessly for hours, digging trenches and clearing brush in an effort to stop the advancing flames. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the mountain bathed in an eerie orange glow. Then, without warning, the wind shifted. A massive wall of fire roared to life behind them, cutting off their escape route. "It felt like the flames were chasing us," James said. The team retreated up a narrow trail, their radios crackling with panicked voices. But the fire seemed to follow them, consuming everything in its path with an unnatural ferocity. The roar of the flames was deafening, but beneath it, James thought he heard something else, a faint rhythmic clicking. They reached a small clearing and paused to regroup. The team's medic, Karen, scanned the crew for injuries while James tried to radio for backup. The static was overwhelming, but then, through the hiss of interference, came a voice. It was distorted and low, but unmistakable. "Why are you here?" James's blood ran cold. "Did anyone else hear that?" he asked, but the crew only shook their heads. He dismissed it as stress and exhaustion, though the unease lingered. As they moved deeper into the forest, the clicking sound grew louder, more insistent. One of the younger firefighters, Mike, froze in his tracks. "Do you see that?" he whispered, pointing ahead. James followed his gaze and saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall, too tall to be human, with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. "Who's there?" James called out, but the figure didn't move. It simply watched them. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the smoke. The team pressed on, their nerves frayed. The fire was closing in from all sides, and the heat was oppressive. They stumbled upon an old logging road and decided to follow it, hoping it would lead them to safety. But the road seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. "It felt like we were walking in circles," Karen said later. "No matter how far we went, the fire stayed right behind us." As they rounded a bend, they came upon an abandoned cabin. It was half-burned and barely standing, but it offered a brief respite from the smoke and heat. The crew filed inside, grateful for even a moment of shelter. But as they caught their breath, the atmosphere inside the cabin grew heavy, oppressive. The clicking sound returned, louder now, echoing off the charred walls. Mike's flashlight flickered, and then they all saw it. A handprint burned into the wooden floorboards began to spread like a stain. The handprint was massive, larger than any human hand, and it glowed faintly with an ember-like light. Karen backed away, her voice trembling. "We need to leave, now." But before they could move, the cabin's door slammed shut. The windows rattled and the clicking sound reached a fever pitch. James shouted for everyone to stay calm, but then the whispers began. They were faint at first, almost imperceptible beneath the roar of the fire outside, but they grew louder, overlapping until they filled the room. "Leave us!" one voice hissed. "You don't belong here!" Another growled. The crew bolted for the door, forcing it open and spilling out into the night. The fire was closer now, its heat searing their skin. They ran without direction, driven by pure adrenaline and fear. James took the lead, guiding them back toward the ridge where they had set up camp earlier that day. But when they arrived, the camp was gone, completely erased, as if it had never been there. "We should have seen the fire shelters," James said, "the supplies." But there was nothing, just ash. The clicking sound returned, louder than ever, and with it came the figures. There were more of them now, tall and shadowy, their glowing eyes piercing through the smoke. They formed a circle around the crew, blocking every possible escape route. "We're not going to make it," Mike muttered, his voice breaking. James refused to give up. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice firm despite the terror gripping his chest. He grabbed a flare from his pack and lit it, holding it high above his head. The figures recoiled, their forms flickering like flames in the wind. "Run!" James shouted. The crew sprinted through the gap, the fire closing in behind them. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out, finally collapsing in a rocky clearing. By some miracle, the fire stopped at the edge of the clearing, as if held back by an invisible barrier. In the daylight, the crew was found by a rescue team. They were dehydrated, singed, and shaken, but alive. When they recounted their experience, the rescue team exchanged uneasy glances. "You're not the first to see them," one of the rescuers admitted. "The locals call them the Watchers. They say the forest doesn't like to be disturbed." James and his team never returned to that mountain. The fire was eventually contained, but the memories of that night lingered. Even now, James can't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by the fire, but by something older, something that didn't want them there. For Captain James, the nightmare didn't end when he left the mountain. The visions of glowing eyes and the whispers in the smoke haunt his dreams, a constant reminder of the terror he faced. Wildfires are a force of nature, unpredictable and deadly, but sometimes they seem to carry something more, a darkness that can't be explained. For those who fight them, the scars are more than physical. They're a reminder that some places aren't meant to be tamed, and some fires burn with a purpose beyond destruction.